From strategically taking off your own gear so your opponent has nothing to grab onto, to the fans trolling the league and voting an enforcer into the All-Star game, in this video we're going to be taking a look at NHL players who forced rule changes. So hit the like button, press subscribe, and let's dive right in. Maran Bruner. Maran Bruner's greatness is immortalized on every sheet of NHL ice in the form of two red lines behind each net. They begin 8 feet outside of each goalpost and extend to the boards along the back wall, creating a trapezoid. In the official NHL rulebook, it's Rule 1.8, the goalkeeper's restricted area. However, most people call this the Maran Bruner rule. The rule was created in 2005, coming out of the year-long lockout, and was one of the several introduced in an attempt to increase scoring. The hope was to make zone entries easier by preventing goalies from handling the puck in the corners on dump-ins, and no goalie did that better than Maran Bruner. Former teammate Jamie Langenbrunner had this to say: "As an opponent, it was something you were very aware of. I don't even want to say he was like a third defenseman back there, because depending on the players on the ice, he may have been the first or second defenseman. Bruner was most certainly a weapon with the puck on his stick. Not only is he the only netminder to score 3 goals, but his passing ability was nearly impossible to play against. He was so effective with the puck that the NHL eventually changed the rules to favor the offense." Speaking of Maran Bruner, he also had something to do with this next rule change. Sha Avery. Sha Avery is one of the most infamously colorful players in NHL history. The ex-left winger has had an interesting career playing with several renowned teams, including the New York Rangers, where he was part of this infamous play. The former Rangers player did something to the New Jersey Devils goaltender no one in the hockey world could ever imagine. He positioned himself in front of Maran Bruner during a 5-on-3 power play in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs on April 13, 2008, and blocked the goalie's vision by waving his arms around and moving his stick in front of his face. Bruner had to deal with the winger's obstructive behavior for an entire minute. Making this even more annoying, Sha Avery ended up scoring on the power play. Now, although this was not an illegal play at the time, NHL players and analysts criticized Avery and the Rangers for being unsportsmanlike. The new rule, now known as the Sha Avery rule, was swiftly implemented in the NHL before the following season. This rule forbids any player to stand directly in front of the goalkeeper and take any other steps that might restrict their field of view. Bill Masterton. Boston's George Owen was said to be the first to wear a helmet in 1928, and head protection became an issue when Toronto's Ace Bailey nearly died after being slammed into the ice by Boston's Eddie Shore. However, it took Bill Masterton's death from a 1968 brain injury to make players at least start thinking seriously about wearing helmets. Finally, in 1979, the NHL ruled all new players must wear a helmet. The last player to ever play an NHL game without wearing a helmet was Craig MacTavish for the St. Louis Blues in the 1996-97 season. John Scott. In 2016, one NHL player was given the unexpected honor and chance of a lifetime. Fans voted John Scott captain of the Pacific Division All-Stars, but that outcome brought panic to the NHL and created a difficult decision for the NHL and for Scott himself. For John Scott, this was the biggest fight of his entire NHL career, and it would be against the NHL. Scott was voted for by fans even though his selection went against the grain of what the NHL has promoted. Some speculate that Scott was the victim of NHL politics, and on the surface it certainly looks that way. The Arizona Coyotes, formerly run by the NHL, surprisingly traded Scott to the Montreal Canadiens before the All-Star game. He was then supposed to report to the Canadiens' farm team, the St. John IceCaps. Now, to some, it may seem absurd to pick Scott to be in an All-Star game over other players with longer and more illustrious careers. Yet, in an act of trolling the league, the fans voted Scott in, and the NHL knew it had to tread lightly. The league asked him to gracefully bow out of the game. However, John Scott said no. Fast forward to the 2016 NHL All-Star game, and Scott was named MVP, scoring 2 goals in the game. Scott may have had the time of his life, but in the end, he was a casualty of war between the NHL and what the fans wanted. Scott's option of playing in the NHL ended when he made the decision to stand his ground and participate in this All-Star game. He retired after playing 1 game with the Montreal Canadiens, a game in which he had 3 shots, 7 hits, and 2 penalty minutes. He was offered the option to return to the minor league team or go home for the remainder of the season. He opted to go home and spend the rest of the season with his family. Since this happened, the NHL has implemented a new rule for fan voting. It's known as the John Scott Rule, which disqualifies players for being named All-Star captains if they are injured or sent to the AHL. Brett Hull. After Yuri Lettinen put the Stars on the board in the first period, the Buffalo Sabres finally broke through for the first time since Game 4 when Stu Barnes beat Ed Belfour late in the second. That would be the last goal scored in this game for more than an hour, as the third period, first overtime, and second overtime all ended in draws. As the evening turned into the morning, the crowd was on the edge as the action remained unbearably tense. Both teams missed numerous chances as both goalies refused to give up a goal. Buffalo's James Patrick came agonizingly close to sending his team to a 7th game when his point shot in the second overtime went off the crossbar. It was 1:30 in the morning as the third overtime was winding down. Then, in the final moments, Brett Hull picked up a pass in front of the Buffalo net and put it behind Dominik Hasek for the first time in 4 periods to end the epic struggle and send the Stanley Cup to Dallas, Texas for the first time ever. The Stars piled onto the ice to celebrate while the Sabres could only sit and await the handshake line. Despite Ed Belfour's brilliance, a surprise came when Joe Nieuwendyk was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy as MVP of the postseason. But then, while the Stars were taking the customary lap around the ice with the Stanley Cup, head coach Lindy Ruff emerged from the Sabres locker room and demanded the game be restarted. Replays showed that Hull's foot had been in the goal crease before the puck was shot. Now, in today's NHL, nobody would think twice and the game would be over, but at the time, this was a hot-button issue. Years earlier, the NHL introduced a new rule in order to give goaltenders more protection. The size of the crease in front of the net was expanded, and it became illegal for a skater to be in the crease without possession of the puck. Frankly, this was a stupid rule and almost universally disliked, as countless goals were overturned despite the goaltender not being obstructed. Nevertheless, the NHL stuck with the change and implemented it numerous times during the 1998-99 season. This Brett Hull situation was what the rule was designed for, but it was never enforced in this moment. Despite what appeared to be a clear violation, the NHL upheld the goal and stated that since Hull had possession beforehand, he was allowed to enter the crease. Both the NHL and Brett Hull continue to insist that the call was correct. It's truly an unfortunate situation for both teams. The Sabres were left feeling robbed of a Game 7, and whether the Stars fans like it or not, the team's only Stanley Cup to date will forever have this cloud looming over it. I'm just happy this is no longer a rule in the NHL today. Jean Beliveau. At first, minor penalties lasted 3 minutes before finally being reduced to 2 minutes in 1921. However, at the time, the penalized player had to serve the full 2 minutes. But on November 5th, 1955, Jean Beliveau scored 3 goals in 44 seconds on the same power play. The powerhouse Canadians scored 26% of all the league's power play goals that season. So, in 1956, the new rule said the penalty ends if a team scores on the power play. This was obviously at the time of the original 6 teams, and the vote was 5-1, with Montreal, of course, voting against it. Martin Biron. Did you know New York Rangers goalie John Davidson was the first player in the NHL to wear 00? Davidson wore this number in the 1977 NHL season. He had worn the number 30 up until that point, but felt that zeros looked good to goalies. Davidson ended up with a 14-13-8 record and a 3.18 goals against average while wearing this unique number. John Davidson was not the only goalie to wear 00, as Martin Biron wore it in his rookie season with the Buffalo Sabres in the 95-96 season. This wouldn't last long, as NHL statisticians discovered a bug in their new stat tracking software, which is now known as the Biron rule, restricting jersey numbers to whole numbers between 1 and 99, which was later changed to 1 and 98 due to the league-wide retirement of 99 for Wayne Gretzky. The Biron rule, known as Rule 9.2, states each player and each goaltender listed in the lineup of each team shall wear an individual identifying number at least 10 inches high on the back of his sweater. Sweater numbers such as 00, fractions, decimals, or 3-digit numbers are not permitted. In addition, each player and goalkeeper shall wear his surname in full in block letters 3 inches high across the back of his sweater at shoulder height. Martin Biron never wore 00 again and switched to number 43. Rob Ray. Rob Ray was known for his toughness across 15 seasons spent in the NHL. Rob Ray dropped the gloves 27 times in the 1995-96 season and another 25 in the 1990-91 season. Additionally, he led the league twice in penalty minutes and set Buffalo team records for penalty minutes in a season and career, which also serves as the NHL record for most penalty minutes with the same team. With all that being said, Rob Ray's most lasting legacy will be the Rob Ray Rule, also known as Rule 56. This rule states a player who engages in fisticuffs and whose sweater is removed completely off his torso, other than through the actions of his opponent in the altercation or through the actions of the linesman, shall be assessed a game misconduct penalty. Rob Ray says, honestly, it's not something I planned. It was just something that evolved. If your role in the game is to be a fighter, well, just like a goal scorer or a goaltender, you're always looking for an edge. The whole thing just sort of happened. At first, I was just wearing a loose sweater with the idea that I can get an arm out of it, and then the guy I was going against couldn't grab my arm and hold it down. After a while, the sweater started coming off altogether, and then it was my shoulder pads, and it kind of went from there. When Rob Ray reached the point where he was shirtless, padless, and wearing completely nothing on his torso, the NHL stepped in. Ray said he didn't mean to make a spectacle of his altercations, he was just trying to exploit an advantage. He then went on to say, but after a while, you could tell that the crowd was really getting into it. I didn't think it was such a bad thing. It certainly brought some entertainment into it. Darcy Tucker. In the first round of the 2001-2002 playoffs, the Maple Leafs met the Islanders in a series that was more fights and cheap hits than actually playing hockey. Game 5 was particularly ugly, seeing the end of Michael Pekka's season. While the hit from Darcy Tucker wasn't technically dirty at the time, it resulted in a rule change. Rule 44.1, clipping. Clipping is the act of throwing the body from any direction across or below the knees of an opponent. A player may not deliver a check in a clipping manner, nor lower his own body position to deliver a check on or below an opponent's knees. Darcy Tucker crouched and took out Michael Pekka's left knee, resulting in an ACL-MCL blowout. Seeing as how the ACL is the ligament that keeps the lower leg from sliding too far forward, and the MCL keeps it from bending too far inward, Michael Pekka was left with an incredibly unstable knee that would need surgery and major rehab. The New York Islanders went on to lose this series, and in their fans' opinion, it was all single-handedly Darcy Tucker's fault. Thanks for watching our videos. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.